Betrayal doesn't come with fanfare. It doesn't announce itself with sirens or spotlights. It walks through the front door wearing the face of someone you love, and by the time you realize what's happening, you're already broken on the floor. I pressed my face to the cold glass of my own front door, my breath fogging the pain as another contraction tore through my spine like a lightning bolt. My belly throbbed, swollen, tight, screaming for relief, on the other side of the glass. My husband Julian sat at our dining table, laughing quietly at something his mother whispered in his ear. They were sipping coffee, calm, comfortable, at my grandmother's antique oak table, the one I had spent weeks refinishing by hand. It should have been a night of urgency, of compassion, of him rushing me to the hospital as I brought our child into the world. Instead, it looked like a lazy Sunday brunch. I was locked outside in the freezing October rain, 8 months pregnant, soaked, and in active labor. "Please," I whispered, barely able to stand, my forehead pressed against the glass. Another wave hit. I doubled over, knuckles white as I clutched the doorframe. I needed help. I needed him. I needed someone to give a damn. But Dorothy, my mother-in-law, simply turned her head and smiled, cold and calm, like winter pretending to be polite. Through the muffled pain, I heard her voice, sharp and certain. She made her choice when she disrespected this family. Let her figure it out herself. Julian didn't even look up from his coffee. That was the moment I died, not physically, but emotionally, spiritually. Everything inside me that still believed in love, in loyalty, in the sacredness of vows, it all shattered. The Madeline who believed in fairy tales and happy endings, who trusted with her whole heart, who thought love could overcome anything. She died on that porch step, and in her place, something colder was born, something stronger. Something that knew the only person who was going to save me was me. Before we continue, let us know in the comments, which country are you watching from? We love hearing from our global family, and if this is your first time on the channel, hit subscribe. Your support helps us bring you even more epic stories of survival, justice, and revenge. 3 hours later, I gave birth alone, no family, no husband, just a kind nurse named Ruby who held my hand while I screamed into the void. My daughter, beautiful, perfect, and fierce from the first breath, came into this world with only me there to welcome her. No father, no grandmother, just the woman who had crawled through hell to bring her here safely. But as I cradled her in my arms, staring out at the city lights glowing beyond the hospital window, I wasn't thinking about Julian anymore. I wasn't thinking about the pain. I was thinking about the joint accounts, the deed to the house, the trust fund I had helped organize. The family business paperwork Dorothy assumed I didn't understand. They had locked me out of my home in my moment of greatest need. Now, I was going to return the favor. By morning, they'd realized just how expensive their cruelty had been, and by the time they figured it out, I'd be gone, along with their money, their secrets, and the granddaughter Dorothy would never meet. Some say revenge is a dish best served cold. I was about to serve it frozen, 6 months earlier. If someone had told me I'd give birth alone while my husband drank coffee with his mother, I would have laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt impossible. Julian loved me, we were happy, or so I thought. We were building something beautiful. Or so I told myself every morning as I woke up in our perfectly restored Victorian house, in our picture-perfect life. The morning that changed everything started like any other Wednesday. I was 7 months pregnant. Moving slowly through our sunlit kitchen while Julian rushed through his routine, his dark hair was still tousled from sleep, and he wore that expensive cologne Dorothy had gifted him for Christmas, the one that made my pregnant nose burn. "Coffee's ready," I said, setting his travel mug on the granite countertop. Her granite countertop, she'd insisted on it over the butcher block I'd wanted. "I packed some of those blueberry muffins you like." "Thanks." He barely looked up from his phone. "Hey. Mom's coming over today to help with the nursery. She's got some ideas for the color scheme." My hand instinctively moved to my belly. "I thought we agreed on the soft yellow. It's already painted. She thinks gender neutral is limiting." He grabbed his coffee and briefcase without glancing up. "She's bringing samples. Just hear her out, okay?" The casual dismissal made my chest tighten. This was our baby, our nursery, but somehow, Dorothy always got the final say. She'd chosen our wedding venue. She'd influenced our home purchase. And now, she was trying to control the room my child would sleep in. Julian, I said gently, I love the yellow, we picked it together, remember? He paused at the kitchen door, finally looking at me. For a moment, I saw him. The man I'd fallen in love with. The man who used to bring me daisies just because, who rubbed my feet after long days, who promised me the world. Madeline, he said softly, Mom just wants what's best. She raised 3 successful kids. Maybe we should trust her experience. And just like that, he was gone. He kissed my forehead, quick, distracted, and headed out. I might be late tonight. Big presentation for the Underwood account. The front door clicked shut, leaving me alone in our beautiful, suffocating house. I stood still for a long time, watching morning light crawl across the marble floors Dorothy had insisted on. More practical than the hardwood I'd begged for, everything in this house told the same story. Madeline's opinions didn't matter. Madeline's dreams could be painted over. Madeline should be grateful and stop asking for more, but I was asking for more. I wanted my husband to choose me over his mother. I wanted my child to grow up in a home where I had a voice. I wanted to feel like I belonged in my own life. At exactly 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Dorothy Santina never arrived early or late. Punctuality, like everything else about her, was a power move, another way to prove she had control. I opened the door to find her standing on our porch like she owned it. And maybe, in some ways, she did. She was dressed immaculately, as always. Cream-colored cashmere coat, designer handbag, pearl earrings worth more than most cars. Her silver hair was swept into a flawless chignon. Her blue eyes, Julian's eyes, scanned me with thinly veiled disapproval. Madeline, darling, she said, air-kissing both cheeks with the warmth of a January breeze. You look tired. Are you sleeping? Stress isn't good for the baby. Less than 10 seconds, and she had already managed to insult my appearance and imply I was a bad mother. Dorothy Santina was a black belt in passive aggression. I'm fine, Dorothy, just normal pregnancy stuff. I stepped aside, letting her sweep through our foyer like a real estate agent evaluating her next acquisition. She ran a manicured finger along the hall table, checking for dust. Julian mentioned you've been emotional, she said. Mood swings are perfectly natural, of course, but you really do need to control them. Men don't like unstable women. My hands curled into fists at my sides. I haven't been unstable, I just have opinions about our baby's nursery. Oh, the yellow, she waved a hand. Such a dreary color. Children need stimulation, dear. Bright colors, gender-appropriate themes. Yellow is so beige. Dorothy pulled a fan of paint samples from her designer purse like a magician performing a trick. Hot pink, electric blue, purple with glitter. The colors made my eyes ache just looking at them. But we don't know the baby's gender yet, I said quietly. Julian and I wanted to be surprised. Her smile was sharp enough to slice. Trust me, darling, a mother always knows. And this baby is going to be important, special. She glanced at the soft yellow walls like they offended her very soul. They deserve better than yellow. She said the word like it tasted bad. For the next 2 hours, we stood in the nursery, my nursery. As she dismantled every choice Julian and I had made, the crib was too simple. The mobile was childish. Even the rocking chair, my grandmother's chair, the one my mother had nursed me in. The one her mother had used before her, was outdated and not ergonomically sound. We should donate it, Dorothy said, brushing her manicured fingers along the worn oak armrests like they were coated in dust. I know a lovely boutique that sells contemporary nursery sets, clean lines, modern design, much more suitable for a Santina. Something inside me snapped. No, Dorothy's perfectly arched eyebrows lifted. Excuse me, I said no, I repeated, firmer this time, that chair stays. It's been in my family for 3 generations. My baby is going to sit in that chair, just like I did, just like my mother did. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees, her blue eyes turned to ice, and the smile on her face became something far more dangerous. Madeline, dear, she said, voice coated in false sweetness, I know you're attached to your family heirlooms, but you need to understand something. This baby is a Santina. She stepped closer, they deserve the finest things. Not hammerdowns from people who couldn't afford better. The insult hit like a slap. No, we hadn't been wealthy, but we'd been rich in the things that mattered. Love, loyalty, respect, qualities money couldn't buy and the Santinas clearly didn't value. Get out, the words left my mouth before I could stop them. Dorothy blinked, her expression tightening. I beg your pardon, I squared my shoulders. I said get out, this is my house, my nursery, my baby, and that chair stays exactly where it is. She stood slowly, movements stiff with offense. Her voice was like silk wrapped around steel. You're making a mistake, Madeline, a very serious mistake. Julian is my son. This family is my family. She let the threat hang in the air before flashing that chilling, condescending smile again. We'll see how that works out for you. She gathered her paint samples and her purse with the dignity of a queen leaving a court that had displeased her, but at the doorway, she paused. Glancing back over her shoulder, there was something in her eyes, something that might have looked like pity if it hadn't been so cruel. Julian will hear about this, of course, and he won't be pleased. You see, darling, my son values family loyalty above all else, he always has. And when he has to choose between his mother and a wife who disrespects her, she gave a delicate shrug. Well, blood is thicker than water, isn't it? The front door clicked shut behind her, somehow. It sounded like a gunshot. I sank into my grandmother's rocking chair, hands shaking as I rubbed my belly. The baby kicked gently, as if sensing my distress. I whispered, more to myself than anything, "It's okay, little one, Mama's got you, Mama always has you." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure if it was true, because Dorothy Santina hadn't just voiced an opinion. She'd declared war, and I was about to find out exactly how far she was willing to go to win. Julian came home 3 hours early. His face was like a storm, his eyes cold and unreadable. He didn't kiss me hello, didn't ask how my day had gone. He just stood in the kitchen doorway like a verdict waiting to be delivered. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his jaw clenched tight. "We need to talk." He began pacing the kitchen like a caged animal, his footsteps echoing sharply against the marble floor. I sat at the breakfast bar, hands wrapped around a cup of chamomile tea that had long gone cold. Watching the man I'd married become a stranger before my eyes. "She was trying to help," he said finally. "That's what mothers do. They help." She wanted to throw out my grandmother's chair. I replied calmly. "She brought hot pink paint samples before we even know if we're having a girl." "So what?" he snapped. "Maybe pink would be nice. Maybe she knows something you don't. She's raised 3 kids. You've raised 0. The words landed like punches. I pressed a hand to my belly. Our baby shifted inside me, restless, picking up on the tension in the room. "This is our child, Julian. Ours, not hers." He stopped pacing and turned to face me. His eyes, his mother's eyes, burned with a fury I'd never seen before. "She's his grandmother. She has a right to be involved." "How do you know she's even right?" I asked. "Why are we just assuming she knows best?" "Because she always knows," he said bitterly, raking a hand through his dark hair. "Even if she didn't. Even if she was wrong about everything. You don't get to throw her out of our house like she's some kind of intruder." "Our house," I repeated. "It feels more like hers every day." Julian froze. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means she picked our paint colors, she chose the furniture. She even decided where we went on our honeymoon. She has opinions about what I eat, what I wear, how I spend my time. I can't breathe in this house without wondering if Dorothy would approve." "That's ridiculous, is it? When was the last time you made a decision without checking with her first? She's my mother, and I'm your wife." I stood up too fast, the room spinning for a moment. Julian reached out to steady me, but I pulled away. "I'm carrying your child. Doesn't that count for something?" For a second, just a second, I saw it, a flicker of the man I'd fallen in love with, the man who used to choose me. But then his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, automatically, a text. From Dorothy, no doubt. When he looked back at me, the softness was gone. "You need to apologize to her." I blinked. "Excuse me." "You heard me," he said. "You embarrassed her, disrespected her, made her feel unwelcome in her son's home." He crossed his arms. He looked so much like Dorothy in that moment, it made my stomach turn. "Call her tonight. Apologize. Make it right." and if I don't, his smile was cold as ice, then you'll find out exactly how unpleasant life can be when you're at war with a Santina. He turned and walked out, leaving me standing in the kitchen, my tea cold, my heart breaking in ways I didn't know were possible. The baby kicked again, hard this time, like a protest. I whispered another promise I wasn't sure I could keep. It's okay, sweetheart, everything's going to be okay. But as afternoon turned to evening, and Julian didn't come home for dinner, I started to understand that nothing would ever be okay again. The war began with small things. Dorothy started calling every morning at exactly 7:30 a.m. Just as Julian was getting dressed for work. There were always urgent questions, family dinners, charity events, concerns about my prenatal care that needed immediate discussion. Julian would sit at the kitchen table, talking to her while his breakfast grew cold. I'd sit across from him in silence, invisible in my own life. Mom thinks you should switch doctors, he announced one morning, not even looking up from his phone. The one you're seeing doesn't deliver at the best hospital. Dr. Eduardo is wonderful, I said. She's been taking care of me since we found out I was pregnant. Mom knows the head of obstetrics at Presarian. She can get you in. I don't want to switch doctors 7 months in. Julian finally looked at me. His expression was calm. Too calm. That special kind of patience men use when they think you're being irrational. Madeline, this is our first baby. Don't you want the best care possible? It was a trap. Elegant, deliberate, impossible to escape. How could I argue against wanting the best for our child without sounding selfish? But I love Dr. Eduardo, I said. She listens, she answers my questions, she makes me feel like a partner in this, not just an incubator being managed by committee. She's good, Julian admitted, but Mom thinks. His phone buzzed again, another text from Dorothy. Just think about it, she wrote. Mom's making some calls today. She might already have an appointment lined up for you. I sat with my hands clenched in my lap, trying to breathe through the growing tension in my chest. She's making decisions about my medical care without even talking to me. She's helping, Julian replied. There's a difference. But I was beginning to realize there wasn't, not where Dorothy was concerned. In her world, help and control were the same thing. Just wrapped in designer paper and tied with a bow made of manipulation. And the medical interference, that was just the start. Dorothy began showing up at our house unannounced. Always with some urgent situation that demanded Julian's immediate attention, a crisis in the family business that only he could resolve, some new drama with his sister, a health scare that turned out to be nothing but still kept him on the phone for hours. She always managed to appear at the worst possible times. Just as we were sitting down for dinner, in the middle of one of our rare intimate conversations, or the one time I actually got Julian to talk about baby names. Her timing wasn't just inconvenient, it was surgical. I'm so sorry to interrupt, she'd say, not sounding the least bit sorry. But Julie, darling, I need your advice on the underaccount. Your father would have known exactly what to do. She never missed a chance to invoke Julian's father whenever she wanted something. Richard Santina had passed when Julian was 25, and ever since, mother and son had been bonded by grief in a way that left no room for a wife, any wife, and Julian. He would drop everything for her. Our dinners would go cold, our conversations would stall, and our fleeting moments together were constantly hijacked by yet another Centeno family emergency that somehow, always, required Julian. I started eating alone, then came the friends. Dorothy had a tight circle of wealthy, well-connected women who'd known Julian since he was a child. They started dropping by the house. Always when Julian wasn't home, they'd settle into my living room like elegant vultures, sipping tea and making veiled observations about my pregnancy, my decor, my life. You look tired, dear, said Caroline Ashworth, whose husband practically owned half the city's commercial real estate. Are you getting enough rest? Julian works so hard, he needs a peaceful home environment. Lovely house, chimed in Margaret Thorne, who came from old money and even older opinions. Though the decor is interesting, very bold, I imagine you'll want to redo it once the baby arrives. Julian's always had such refined taste. Nothing was outright rude, everything came packaged as polite concern, delivered with perfect smiles that never touched their eyes. But the message was crystal clear: I didn't belong, I wasn't good enough for Julian, I was a phase, a temporary inconvenience, a mistake that would be corrected in time. I stopped answering the door, but Dorothy wasn't done. She started hosting elaborate family dinners at her estate, lavish events with 5-course meals and expensive wine I couldn't drink. She'd place me at the far end of the table, well away from Julian, and then proceed to hold court like the queen she'd always believed herself to be. Julian, tell everyone about the underpresentation you chaired, she'd say, and Julian, ever the loyal son, would launch into detailed accounts of his work. While I quietly moved food around on my plate and tried not to feel invisible, Natalie, how's the wedding planning coming along? She'd ask his sister, who was marrying a pharmaceutical heir in a wedding fit for royalty. Thomas, any updates on the European expansion? She'd say to Julian's older brother, who ran the international side of the family business. She asked everyone about their lives, their work, their dreams, everyone, except me. And on the rare occasion the conversation turned toward me, it was never to me, it was about me, always in the third person. How is she feeling? Is she eating enough, getting enough exercise? We want a healthy baby, don't we? I wasn't a person anymore, I was a vessel, an incubator, a necessary step in producing the next Centeno heir. And the worst part, Julian let it happen. My husband, the man who once promised to love and protect me, sat silently at his mother's table while she erased me. One dinner at a time, he'd nod along with her plans, chuckle at her snide little jabs, and never once ask me how I felt. After one particularly brutal evening, I finally snapped. Your mother hates me, I said quietly, staring out the window as we drove home. She doesn't hate you, Julian said, eyes on the road. She's just protective. Protective of what? You're not a child, Julian, you're a married man, we're having a baby together. She worries we moved too fast, that we didn't know each other well enough before getting married. We dated for 2 years, we were engaged for 1. How much longer would have been long enough? It's not about time, he said, almost wearily, it's about compatibility, shared values, understanding what family means. I looked at him, bathed in the pale glow of the dashboard. This man I thought I knew. What does family mean to you, Julian? It means loyalty, he said softly. It means putting family first, always. It means understanding that some bonds can't be broken, no matter what. What about the bond between husband and wife? I asked. He didn't answer for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was distant, almost sad. My mother gave up everything for this family. She could have remarried after my dad died. She could have started over. But instead, she poured her life into us. Into the business, our education, our future. None of this would exist without her sacrifices. And now I'm supposed to sacrifice mine for hers? I asked. It's not a sacrifice, he said. It's love. But sitting in our driveway that night, watching Julian wrestle with chains I couldn't see, chains that bound him to a woman who would never let him go, I started to wonder if he even knew the difference anymore. By the 8th month of my pregnancy, I felt like a ghost in my own life. Dorothy had successfully cut me off from everything that mattered. My husband's attention, my voice in parenting decisions, even my sense of self-worth. I went through each day like a sleepwalker, going through the motions of pregnancy while feeling more and more detached from the baby growing inside me. Dr. Edwards was concerned. My blood pressure was up. The stress was affecting both me and the baby, but when I tried to talk to Julian, he brushed it off as hormones and emotional overreaction. Maybe you should talk to someone, he suggested over breakfast one morning, never looking up from his newspaper. Mom knows an excellent therapist who specializes in prenatal anxiety. Of course she did. I don't need therapy, Julian, I said. I need my husband to support me. I do support you. When do you actually support me? You haven't stood by me once in the past 3 months. He folded his paper with a sharp snap. There are no sides, Madeline. There's just family. And family sticks together. I'm your family too. Are you? The question lingered in the air like poison. Because lately, he added, it feels like you're trying to tear this family apart. I stared at him, this stranger wearing my husband's face, and something inside me broke, not just the love that had been bleeding out for a while, But hope, the naive belief that we could still find our way back, that our baby would be born into a home filled with love, not war. Fine, I whispered, I'll stop trying. Julian looked almost relieved. Good, he said, maybe now we can finally have some peace. But in Julian's world, peace meant surrender. It meant letting Dorothy pull every string. It meant smiling and nodding while he planned our child's future without me. It meant becoming a background character in my own life. I tried, for 2 weeks, I really did. I swallowed my pride and played the part. When Dorothy suggested we switch pediatricians, I nodded and took note. When she handed me a list of acceptable baby names, I smiled and said they were lovely. When Julian told me she'd already hired a nanny to help me adjust to motherhood, I thanked her for thinking of everything. Julian was happier than he'd been in months. The tension in our home seemed to melt away, replaced by a false harmony that felt less like peace and more like quiet surrender. He started coming home for dinner again. He brought flowers. He talked about our future with a kind of wide-eyed excitement that might have been contagious. If I hadn't been dying inside, one of Mom's ideas, he said one night as we cuddled on the couch, watching TV. She thinks we should add on to the house, build a proper nursery wing, maybe even a nanny suite. I know a guy, an architect. Of course he did. If he heard the exhaustion in my voice, he didn't comment on it. And she's already put us on the waiting list for price-ols. You have to apply before the baby's even born. The baby kicked. I laid my hands on my belly and whispered silently, I'm sorry, little one, I'm trying to make this world better for you. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night in October. I was 37 weeks pregnant, huge, uncomfortable, and bone-deep tired. Julian was working late. Again, another so-called emergency at work. I made dinner for one and settled in for yet another lonely evening. When the first contractions hit, at first, I thought it was Braxton Hicks. I'd had plenty of false alarms already, but these were different, sharper, stronger, more rhythmic. By 9 p.m., I was timing them on my phone, 5 minutes apart, lasting 4 to 5 seconds each. I called Julian. I think this might be it, I said when he picked up. The contractions are getting stronger. Are you sure? He asked. Remember what the doctor said about false labor? Another contraction hit, and I grabbed the kitchen counter, breathing through the pain. Pretty sure. Okay. Just hang on. Let me wrap things up here. Can you call Mom? She knows what to do. My heart dropped. Julian, I need you to come home. Now. I will, I promise. Just call her first. Okay, she's done this before. The line went dead. I stared at the phone in disbelief. My husband, the father of the baby I was about to bring into the world, had just told me to call his mother instead of coming home to help his laboring wife, but the pain was intensifying. And I couldn't afford to wait. Swallowing the last of my pride, I called Dorothy. Madeline, is everything all right? I think I'm in labor, I said. Julian told me to call you. There was a pause, a long one. Are you sure, dear? First babies usually take longer than expected. Another contraction gripped me hard. I bent over, pressing my forehead to the cold granite counter. I'm pretty sure. Well, false alarms are very common. Why don't you take a warm bath and see if they go away? If it's real labor, they'll continue. If not, you'll avoid an unnecessary trip to the hospital. Dorothy, I think, trust me, dear, I've done this 3 times. You'll know when it's real. And she hung up. I stood in my kitchen, bent over with pain, waves of contractions rolling through me, and I had never felt so alone in my life. The 2 people who should have been there, rushing to help, had dismissed me like I was a child with a stomachache. Fine, I'd handled everything else alone. I could handle this too. I showered, packed my hospital bag, and called a taxi. By the time I was ready to leave, the contractions were coming every 3 minutes, and I could barely walk through them. I left a note on the kitchen table. Gone to hospital, in labor, call me. As I waited on the porch, doubled over in pain, headlights swept across the driveway. Julian's car. Relief washed over me. He'd come. He'd realized this was real. He was going to take me to the hospital. Julian rushed up the steps. Madeline, what's wrong? Labor. I gasped. Real labor. The taxi's on its way. Okay, let me just grab my phone charger. Another car pulled into the drive. Dorothy's silver Mercedes. My heart sank. She stepped out in a black cocktail dress, pearls at her throat, heels clicking like a countdown. "How is she?" she called out in a voice full of public concern but private calculation. "I think it's really happening this time," Julian said, running a hand through his hair. "The contractions are close together." Dorothy looked me over like I was livestock at auction. "First labors usually take 12 to 20 hours. No need to rush. I need to get to the hospital," I panted, clutching the porch railing. "Nonsense," Dorothy said. "Hospitals just send you home if you're not far enough along. You'll be more comfortable here." She turned to Julian, ignoring me completely. "Why don't you help her inside? I brought wine to celebrate. This could be the night we meet our grandchild." Julian hesitated. He looked at his mother, then at me. For one fleeting moment, I thought he'd choose me. I thought he'd say, "My wife needs the hospital, everything else can wait." But instead, he said, "Mom's probably right. It's still early. Let's just get you comfortable and see how things go." "Julian, I need to go, now," but he was already guiding me toward the front door. "Come on, sweetheart, a few more hours won't hurt." The taxi arrived just as Dorothy opened the door. Julian waved the driver away with a calm, entitled hand. "Sorry, we won't be needing you after all." I watched my escape disappear down the street, and something inside me shattered. Not cracked, shattered into so many pieces. I knew I'd never be whole again. They led me inside like I was a fussy toddler, not a woman in active labor. Dorothy took over instantly, sending Julian for wine and hovering near me like a self-appointed midwife. "The contractions aren't that close," she announced after watching me for 5 minutes, "and you're still talking through them. Trust me, when it's really time, you'll know." But I did know. My entire body was screaming it. The contractions were intensifying. Closer, sharper. I didn't need a glass of wine. I needed a hospital. I needed doctors, nurses, real help. "I want to go," I said firmly. "To the hospital." Dorothy's smile sharpened. "Madeline, dear, you're being dramatic. First-time mothers always think they know better." But then a contraction hit so hard, I couldn't even breathe. I gripped the arm of the couch, my vision going white at the edges, pain tearing through me like a blade. When I could finally see again, Dorothy and Julian were both staring at me, not with concern, but with annoyance. "You're scaring Julian," Dorothy said gently, with that faux sweetness that always meant danger. "Maybe you should lie down until you can calm yourself." "Calm myself," I gasped. "I'm in labor. I'm calling an ambulance," I said, reaching for my phone. Dorothy's hand clamped over mine, shockingly strong. "You're not thinking clearly, dear. The hormones, the pain. Let Julian and me handle this." I turned to my husband, desperate to find the man I married, hoping, begging, for him to see me. Instead, he nodded. "She's right, you're getting worked up, and that's not good for the baby. Try to rest." Another contraction hit. This time, my water broke in a rush. It soaked through my clothes and pooled on the floor. For a second, there was silence. Then Dorothy sighed. "Well, that's going to stain." Not, "Oh my God, we need to get to the hospital." Not even a shred of urgency. "Just worry about the floors, that's it." I gasped, pushing myself to stand. "I'm leaving, with or without you." But as I staggered toward the door, Dorothy stepped in front of me. Her blue eyes glinted like ice. Her smile was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. "I don't think so, dear," she said, and then I heard the click, the deadbolt sliding into place. Julian had locked the front door, and the nightmare had only just begun. Every time I tried to leave, tried to call for help, reach a phone, make it to the door, Dorothy or Julian would stop me, always gently, always with a calm, patronizing voice that made me feel like I was losing my mind. "You're in transition," Dorothy kept repeating, as if reciting from a medical textbook. "It's perfectly normal to feel overwhelmed, but panicking won't help the baby." They moved me to the living room. Dorothy took command, directing Julian to bring towels and blankets like a midwife preparing for a home birth. On the surface, she was the concerned grandmother-to-be, but in her eyes, I saw it. Calculation. Cold, sharp calculation. She wasn't worried about my safety. She didn't care about the baby's well-being. This was about control. About making sure that even the birth of my child happened her way, on her terms, under her supervision. that she, not I, remained the authority in this family. "Julian, please," I begged him in the lull between contractions, "something's wrong. I can feel it, we need to go to the hospital." He looked at me, not with love, but with pity. "Madeline, you're scaring yourself," he said softly. "Mom delivered Thomas at home. The hospital was too far. She knows what she's doing. I'm not your mother." I snapped, my voice cracking, "And this isn't 30 years ago. I need a doctor." "You need to calm down," Dorothy said sharply. "This hysteria is putting unnecessary stress on the baby." But it wasn't hysteria, the baby was in distress. I knew it, I could feel the difference. The kicks had changed, grown frantic, then terrifyingly still. The contractions were unbearable, but they weren't progressing right. Something was very wrong. "My baby," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "Please." "Something's wrong with my baby." Dorothy's face softened, but not with compassion. If you looked closely enough, her eyes were still cold. "The baby is fine, dear. You're just frightened. First births are always scary." She knelt beside me, placing a manicured hand on my swollen belly with a kind of possessive tenderness that made my skin crawl. "There's nothing to worry about. Julian will take care of everything." "Not take care of you, take care of everything." As if I were just another detail to manage in Dorothy's perfectly curated world. The pain intensified. I was losing time, losing sense of where I was, but through the haze, I could still see them, Dorothy and Julian, whispering together in the corner like co-conspirators. "Please," I choked out, reaching a trembling hand toward them. "Please, help me." Dorothy returned to my side, smiling, calm, terrifying. "We are helping you, darling. We're keeping you safe." No, they were keeping me contained, keeping me quiet. They wanted this birth to go exactly how she envisioned it, not as a medical event, but as a page in her family scrapbook, one where she got to be the wise matriarch who saved the day while the silly, emotional young wife crumbled. And Julian, he was letting her do it. Hours passed in a blur of agony and desperation. I begged, I pleaded, I tried to reason, but every time I tried to assert any control over my own body, my own labor, I was met with patronizing smiles and gentle refusal. "You're not thinking clearly," became Dorothy's favorite line. "Let us handle this." Finally, when the pain was so overwhelming I couldn't form coherent words, when I truly believed I might die in that living room, right alongside my unborn baby, I asked to go outside for some fresh air. Dorothy tried to stop me again, but this time, I didn't let her. "You can't go outside in your condition," she warned. "Watch me," I said. I stood, wobbled, forced myself to the porch, there, hunched over in the freezing night air. I clutched my belly through another wave of pain, trying to open the front door, only to realize it was locked from the inside. I pressed my face against the cold glass, breath fogging the window as I watched, helpless, as Julian and Dorothy sat at the dining table, sipping coffee and eating pastries. Our dining table, my grandmother's antique oak table, the one I had refinished with my own hands. They looked like they were having brunch, not like it was the night their child, our child, was being born. I whispered against the glass, "Please." Another contraction hit, doubling me over, white-knuckled and breathless. I needed a hospital, I needed help, I needed my husband. But Dorothy only smiled, that same cold, smug smile, and through the window, I saw her lips move. She made her choice when she disrespected me. Let her figure it out herself. Julian didn't even look up. The man who once promised to love and protect me until death do us part couldn't even meet my eyes. That's when I made my decision. I called an ambulance. When it pulled into the drive, sirens low but insistent, they finally opened the door. Dorothy and Julian stepped outside like everything was fine, like they'd always planned to go to the hospital. "I think it's time we head to the hospital now," Dorothy announced, suddenly all fake concern. Julian rushed to the car. "I'll get it started." And just like that, after hours of ignoring me, dismissing my pain, and locking me out of my own home, they decided it was time, not because I was in distress, but because she was ready. They helped me into the car like it was an act of grace. Dorothy fussed with pillows and blankets in the backseat, while Julian warmed the engine. By then, I was barely conscious. trapped in the spaces between contractions, held together by sheer instinct. "Don't worry, dear," Dorothy murmured, smoothing my hair like a doll. "We'll be there soon, and you'll see." Everything worked out exactly the way it was supposed to, but as the car pulled out of the driveway, I caught a glimpse of her reflection in the rearview mirror. She was smiling, not with love, not with relief, but with satisfaction. She had won, and I was still bleeding. Everything happened fast. The nurses took one look at me and immediately rushed me to labor and delivery, their faces tight with professional concern. For the first time in hours, I felt a flicker of comfort when Dr. Eduardo appeared. Calm, focused, familiar. "Madeline," she said, checking my vitals with swift precision, "why didn't you come in earlier? You're in active labor, and the baby's showing signs of distress." I tried to explain, but another contraction tore the words from my mouth and replaced them with screams. Behind me, I heard Dorothy's voice, smooth and syrupy, spinning her version of events. She was terrified. "Poor thing. We tried to get her here sooner, but she insisted she wasn't ready. First-time mothers. Well, you know how they are." The lies dripped from her tongue like honey, each one designed to make me sound irrational, unstable, while she played the concerned, experienced grandmother who had done her best to help. "We'll take good care of her," one of the nurses assured her. "Actually," Dorothy interjected, her voice now silk over steel, the tone I knew too well, "I'd like to stay. I've had extensive experience with childbirth, and Madeline tends to get overwhelmed under stress." Dr. Eduardo looked at me, waiting, but in that moment, I could barely breathe, let alone speak. The pain was devouring everything. "It's up to Madeline," the doctor said gently. "I want her out," I gasped between contractions. "Please, just Julian, only Julian." Dorothy's face turned ghost pale with fury, but she couldn't argue. "Not here, not in front of the staff, not without tearing away her carefully crafted disguise." "Of course, dear," she said through clenched teeth, "whatever you think is best." But as she passed my bed on her way out, she leaned down and whispered in my ear, so quietly no one else could hear, "This isn't over." The next hour was a blur of bright lights, fast hands, and searing pain. Dr. Eduardo moved with focused urgency, guiding her team, her tone clipped but calm. She did what Dorothy had only pretended to do. She truly cared. "The baby's heart rate is dropping," she told the nurses. "We need to move quickly." Emergency protocol kicked in. Julian stood at my side, gripping my hand, pale and shaking, while professionals worked to save the life of a child who'd been at risk for hours, while his mother played doctor in our living room. And then Florence arrived, tiny, beautiful, alive, perfect. The tears came without warning, tears of relief, exhaustion, and something deeper, disbelief that we'd made it, that she'd made it. Julian cried, too. He looked at her like she was the center of the universe, like he had just realized how close we'd come to losing everything. "She's beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Madeline, she's perfect." For a moment, as he stroked my hair and I held our daughter against my chest, I let myself believe we might find our way back, that becoming parents would remind him of what mattered, that maybe, just maybe, this nightmare with Dorothy was finally over. Then the door opened, and Dorothy swept in like she owned the hospital. Her arms were full of flowers, her smile beamed with self-satisfaction. "Oh, she's lovely," she cooed, walking straight to the bed without asking. "Absolutely perfect. She looks just like Julian did when he was born." Before I could react, she reached for Florence, lifted her right out of my arms, cradled her like a prize she had waited all evening to claim. "Hello, sweetheart," she whispered to my daughter. "Grandmother's here. Grandmother's going to take such good care of you." I lay there, spent and helpless, as Dorothy claimed my child the same way she claimed everything else in our lives. With certainty, with entitlement, with zero regard for boundaries, Julian stood beside her, glowing with pride, letting his mother soak in the attention of the nurses and staff like some triumphant queen. No one mentioned the hours I had spent begging for help. No one acknowledged that Florence's distress might have been avoided if we'd come to the hospital earlier. No one questioned Dorothy's narrative. The story was already being rewritten. Dorothy was the hero, I was the irrational mother, and Julian was just happy, His mother and his daughter were finally bonding, as I lay in that hospital bed, watching Dorothy rock my baby while Julian gazed at them both like he couldn't imagine anything more perfect. Something inside me shifted, something final. I understood then, nothing was going to change. Dorothy would continue to control every detail of our lives. Julian would continue to let her, and I would continue to disappear, piece by piece, unless I changed it myself. Eventually, the nurses took Florence to the nursery for her first checkup. Julian followed them, and for the first time since the ordeal began, I was alone with Dorothy. She sat in the chair beside my bed. Serene, smug, satisfied. "Well," she said casually, crossing her legs, "that wasn't so bad, was it? Everything worked out perfectly in the end." I stared at her. This woman who had terrorized me for months, who had risked my life, and my baby's, to preserve her sense of control. "You could have killed us both. Don't be dramatic, dear. I've had 3 children. I know what real labor looks like." "The baby was in distress," I said through clenched teeth. "Dr. Eduardo said so." She waved a hand dismissively. "Doctors always say that, it makes them feel important. But Florence is perfectly healthy, which proves my instincts were right." Her instincts, not medical expertise, not logic, not even basic human decency, just her unwavering belief that she was always right. "You locked me in the house," I said quietly. "You prevented me from getting medical care. I prevented you from embarrassing yourself by rushing in too early. You should be thanking me." The cruelty of it stole my breath. Even now, after everything, after the screams, the fear, the ambulance, she still believed she was helping, in Dorothy's world. Her judgment was infallible, her decisions were unquestionable. Anyone who disagreed was simply too ignorant to appreciate her wisdom. "I hate you," I whispered. She smiled. "I know, dear, but hatred is a luxury you can't afford anymore." She leaned forward, blue eyes as cold as Arctic wind. "You have a daughter now. A daughter who needs stability, security, a family that isn't torn apart by silly, selfish drama. She deserves better than a mother who puts her own emotions ahead of what's best." Her voice lowered to a threat wrapped in velvet. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize for your behavior tonight. You're going to thank Julian and me for taking care of you, and you're going to put an end to this childish rebellion that's been tearing this family apart." "And if I don't?" I asked. Though I already knew the answer. "Then you'll find out exactly how hard life can be for a new mother with no support system, no husband who trusts her, no family who believes her, no friends who want to deal with her drama." Her voice was soft steel. "Julian is a Centeno, Florence is a Centeno, and the Centenos take care of their own, but only when their own know their place." She stood, smoothed her dress with elegant precision. "I'll give you some time to think it over, but don't take too long. Julian is waiting for your apology, and he's not a patient man when his family is under attack." The door clicked shut behind her, and I was left alone. In the sterile quiet of the hospital room, with her words ringing in my ears, I closed my eyes and thought about my daughter, sleeping peacefully in the nursery, while her father and grandmother planned her future. Without me, Dorothy was right about one thing: I couldn't afford hatred anymore. Hatred was a luxury for people who had the power to act on it, and tomorrow, I would find mine. But revenge was different. Revenge was patient, revenge was methodical. Revenge waited for the perfect moment and then struck with surgical precision, and as I lay in that hospital bed, my body broken in, my heart shattered, I began to plan the first few weeks after Fawn's birth passed in a heiser of exhaustion and growing clarity. Dorothy had been right about one thing. New mothers with no support system faced impossible challenges. What he hadn't counted on was that desperation could be a teacher and isolation could be a gift. While Julian worked long hours and Dorothy held court in our living room with a parade of Admiral S cooing over her grandchild, I spent my days learning things I'd never bothered to understand before, important things, dangerous things, like the fact that our joint bank accounts had been set up with Julian as the primary holder, giving him the power to freeze my access with a single phone call, like the fact that our house, despite my name being on the deed, had been purchased with money from a Sentinel family trust that came with strings attached, Strings that could be pulled if I ever became unsuitable as Julian's wife, like the fact that the family business Julian managed so successfully was actually a web of shell companies, offshore accounts and tax shelters that would make the IRS very, very interested if they ever came to light. I learned these things slowly, carefully during those quiet hours when everyone assumed I was napping or bonding with the baby. While Dorothy entertained her friends downstairs and Julian worked at his office, I sat in our bedroom with my laptop, following paper trails and connecting dots with the methodical patience of someone who had nothing left to lose. The picture that emerged was fascinating. The Santa family fortune built on Richard's successful investment firm wasn't quite as legitimate as that led everyone to believe there were questionable transactions, suspicious timing on stock trades and a pattern of insider information that would have sent lesser man to prison. Dorothy had been more than just a grieving widow managing her late husband's estate. She'd been an active participant in financial schemes that made their wealth possible, and she'd been very careful to document everything, presumably as insurance against anyone who might threaten her position, including Julian, my husband. The golden son, who could do no wrong, was completely dependent on his mother's continued goodwill. The business he managed, SHE owned IT, the house we lived in, SHE held the deed, the trust fund had inherit. He controlled the distribution. Julian Santina, successful businessman and devoted son, was actually a very expensive puppet, dancing on strings his mother had woven for money, guilt, and fear. Understanding the dynamics was the first step, gathering evidence was the second. Dorothy kept meticulous records stored in a home office that should shown off to guests like a trophy room, financial documents, business correspondence, legal papers, all of IT organized with the same obsessive precision SHE applied to everything else in her life. SHE also kept a journal, a leather-bound book, where SHE recorded her thoughts, plans and observations about the family. I'd seen her writing in IT during those long evenings when SE held court in our living room, her pen moving across the pages with decisive strokes. Getting access to these things would be impossible under normal circumstances. Dorothy guarded her privacy fiercely, and Julian would never betray his mother's trust, even for his wife, but circumstances weren't normal anymore. I wasn't the naive young woman who had married into this family 18 months ago. I was a mother now with a daughter whose future depended on my ability to outmaneuver the woman who saw her as nothing more than another possession to be controlled. The plan began to take shape during those quiet feeding sessions in the middle of the night, while Florence, nursed in the house, slept around us. I worked out the details with the same careful attention Dorothy had taught me to apply to everything else that would require patience. IT would require perfect timing, and IT would require me to become someone I've never been before, someone capable of deception, manipulation, and ruthless calculation. Someone like Dorothy herself. The irony wasn't lost on me. To defeat the monster I would have to become one. But as I looked down at my sleeping daughter, her tiny fingers curled around mine in complete trust, I knew I would become anything necessary to protect her from the fate Dorothy had planned. Florence Rose Santina would not grow up to be another puppet in her grandmother's collection, even if you meant destroying everything else in the process. The key to Northy's office came to me through pure luck disguised as disaster. Julian's sister Madeline was getting married in 6 weeks, and the previous ding chaos provided perfect cover for my reconnaissance missions. Dorothy was in full event planning mode, coordinating with caterers, flourish and photographers while managing family politics with her usual iron fist. During one particularly frantic afternoon, SHE rushed out to handle a floral emergency at the venue, leaving her purse behind in our kitchen. Inside that purse, along with the usual collection of credit cards and cosmetics, was a small silver key I'd seen her use to lock her office door. I had 20 minutes before he returned, maybe 30. If the forest was as incompetent as Dorothy had declared him to be, my hands shook as I made an impression of the key using soap and aluminium foil. A trick I'd learned from a true crime podcast during one of those sleepiness nights with Florence. IT wasn't perfect, but I would have to do. Dorothy returned 35 minutes later, muttering about incompetent vendors and artistic temperature. Completely oblivious to the fact that her fortress had been breached, getting a copy made took another week of careful planning. I had to wait for the right moment when Julian was at work and Dorothy was distracted to slip out with Forrest for what I claimed was a routine pediatrician appointment. The locksmith asked no questions, and I had my golden ticket to Dorothy's Sancy. The first time I entered her office uninvited, my heart pounded so hard. I was sure the entire NASOD could hear it. The room was exactly what I'd expected, all dark wood and leather, with expensive artwork and carefully arranged family photos that told the story. Dorothy wanted the world to believe her desk was massive, an antique that had probably cost more than most people's cars. The surface was clear, except for a crystal paperweight, a fountain pen and a small leather journal. I'd seen her writing in countless times. I photographed everything. Financial statements showing the intricate web of Centeno family accounts, legal documents revealing the true ownership structure of Julian's, business correspondence with lawyers, accountants, and business partners that painted a very different picture of the family's wealth than what they presented to the world. But it was the journal that provided the most damaging evidence. Doris's neat handwriting revealed a woman who saw people as chess pieces to be moved around the board. Only he could see there were detailed analysis of family members' weaknesses, plans for manipulating various situations to her advantage and cold assessments of threats to her power. The entries about me were particularly illuminating. Madeline continues to resist integration into the family structure. Her attachment to her working-class background makes her unsuitable for the Santina name. But Julian's infatuation makes direct action impossible. Pregnancy may provide leverage. New mothers are typically more, especially when isolated from external support systems. The nursery incident was instructive. Madeline has more backbone than initially assessed, but he lacks the strategic thinking necessary to pose a real threat. Emotional manipulation remains the most effective approach. Labor complications provided excellent opportunity to demonstrate Madeleine's instability and poor judgment. Julia now questions her maternal instincts, which will be useful for future custody discussions if marriage becomes untenable. Custody discussions. The words hit me like ice water. Dorothy wasn't just trying to control my marriage, he was already planning for its dissolution. And SHE was documenting evidence he could use to take my daughter away from me. I photographed every page, my hand steady. Or now that I understood the true scope of the threat I was facing, this wasn't just about a controlling mother-in-law anymore. This was about survival. The financial records were equally revealing. The Centeno fortune was built on a foundation of questionable investments, tax evasion, and what appeared to be systematic insider trading. Dorothy had documentation going back 20 years. All of it organized with the precision of someone who understood its value as insurance or blackmail material. No wonder Julian couldn't break free from his mother's control. SHE held evidence that could destroy not just his business, but his freedom. The devoted son act wasn't just emotional manipulation. It was self-preservation. Over the following weeks, I made multiple visits to Dorsey office, always during those brief windows when I could be certain of privacy. I copied files, photographed documents, and slowly assembled a complete picture of the Sentence family's financial empire. What I found was damning enough to destroy them all, but destruction wasn't my goal, not yet. I wanted something more precise, more poetic. I wanted Dorothy to understand exactly what I felt like to be trapped, helpless, independent on someone else's mercy. I wanted her to experience the same isolation and desperation she'd inflicted on me, and I was beginning to see exactly how to make that happen. The opportunity I'd been waiting for arrived in the form of Natalie's wedding weekend. The entire Centeno clan would be gathered at Dorothy Estate for 3 days of celebrations, leaving our house empty in my movements. Unmonitored for the first time in months, Julian was stressed about his best man duties. Dorothy was orchestrating every detail of the event with military precision, and everyone was too distracted by campaign tastings and rehearsal dinners to pay attention to what the quiet new mother was doing with her spare time. Perfect. I'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, gathering not just evidence, but the tools I'd need to execute my plan. A new cell phone registered under a false name. A safety deposit box at a bank across town where Dorothy would never think to look, legal documents prepared by a lawyer who specialized in high conflict, divorces, and custody cases. Most importantly, I'd opened my own bank account. Something I should have done years ago but had never bothered with because Julian handled all our finances. IT contained only a few $100s for my old savings account, but IT was mine completely separate from the Santi financial web. The wedding festivities began on a Friday evening with a rehearsal dinner at the country club. I played my part perfectly, the supportive wife helping Julian with his tie, the grateful daughter-in-law complimenting Dorothy's event planning, the devoted mother showing off baby forms to distant relatives who could appropriately and then forgot about us. Nobody noticed when I slipped away early, claiming exhaustion and nursing duties. Nobody questioned my absence from the after-party activities. Nobody thought twice about the young mother who preferred quiet evenings at home to social obligations. They saw exactly what they expected to see: Madeline, the Mick wife, who knew her place that night. While the Centeno family celebrated at the country club, I began the most important work of my life. First, I transferred every piece of evidence I'd gathered to secure digital storage and hard copy backup PS financial records, legal documents, Dorothy damning journal entries. All of IT safely preserved in multiple locations, SHE couldn't access or control. Then I made some phone calls. The iOS has a whistleblower program that rewards people who report tax fraud with a percentage of the recovered funds. The SEC offers similar incentives for reporting security violations, and family court judges take a very dim view of parents who use children as weapons in custody disputes. I didn't make formal reports that night that would come later when the timing was perfect, but I established contact with the right people, provided preliminary information and laid the groundwork for what would become a very thorough investigation of Santa family business practices. By dawn, I had set in motion a chain of events that would unravel this carefully constructed empire, one threat at a time, but the real masterpiece was still to come. Saturday's wedding ceremony was beautiful in the way only unlimited money could make possible. Nail, I looked radiant in her designer gown, the group seemed genuinely smitten, and Dorothy held court like the Queen Mother should always believed herself to be. I sat in the back with Florence, applauding at appropriate moments and smiling for family photos, all while mentally reviewing the final details of my plan. Everything had to happen in exactly the right sequence with perfect timing to achieve the maximum impact. The reception was even more elaborate than the ceremony. Hundreds of guests filled Northeast Estate, dining on cuisine prepared by celebrity chefs and dancing to music provided by a full orchestra. IT was the kind of event that would be featured in society magazines, a testament to Northeast taste, wealth, and social position. He was also the perfect distraction. While everyone celebrated and Dorothy basked in the glory of her successful event management, I executed the final phase of my preparation: bank account transfers, legal document filings, digital communications with lawyers, reporters, and government agencies. By the time the last guest left on Sunday evening, I had everything in place. Monday morning would bring a new reality to the Centeno family, but they didn't know that yet. Dorothy was in an excellent mood as we cleaned up after the weekend's festivities. The wedding had been a social triumph. H&SHE had received numerous compliments on her organization skills and impeached taste. Even Julian seemed more relaxed than usual. The successful completion of his best man duties, lifting some of the constant stress that had become his default state, that went very well, Dorothy announced. As we packed away the last of the wedding decorations, Natalie looked beautiful. The ceremony was flowers, and everyone had a wonderful time. It's so satisfying when careful planning produces perfect results, I noted and smiled, playing my role to perfection. You did an amazing job, everything was gorgeous. Thank you, dear, I'm glad you appreciate the effort involved. He paused. Study my face with those calculating blue eyes. You've seemed much more settled lately, less resistant to family input. Motherhood has matured. You finally. As he knew how much I've been thinking about what you said at the hospital, I lied smoothly about putting family first in providing stability for Florence. You were right, I was being selfish and emotional. Dorothy's smile was triumph. "I'm so pleased to hear you say that Julian will be thrilled. He's been worried about the tension in the house. I want to do better for Floran's sake." "Excellent. In that case, I have some ideas about how we might restructure things to work more efficiently for everyone." Dorothy settled into her favorite chair, clearly prepared to outline her vision for my complete capitation. "I've been thinking about the nanny situation, and I believe live-in help would be best. I know the perfect candidate. Very experienced, excellent references, and completely loyal to family interests." Loyal to family interest. Translation: a spy who would report my every move directly to Dorothy. "That sounds wonderful," I said, injecting just the right amount of gratitude into my voice. "I could use the help, and I think it would be beneficial for you to take on more responsibility, i.e., with the family business. Nothing too complex, of course. But Julian could use an assistant with his administrative tasks. It would give you a sense of purpose beyond motherhood." Administrative tasks. Access to business records that could be used to further incriminate me if things went wrong. Another chain to bind me to the Santina Empire. "I'd love to help however I can." Dorothy beamed at me like I was a particularly promising student who'd finally grasp a difficult concept. "Wonderful. We'll start making arrangements immediately. I have such a good feeling about how things are going to work out." She had no idea how right she was. Tuesday morning dawned clear and cold with the kind of Kai's bottomer light that made everything look sharp-edged and significant. I woke up early as had become my habit since forensic, and lay in bed for a few minutes listening to the sounds of my family beginning their day. Julian's alarm buzzed at exactly 6:30. He rolled out of bed with a groan, stumbled toward the bathroom and began his morning routine with the same methodical precision he applied to everything else: shower, shave, dress, coffee, news, briefcase, goodbyes, kiss that barely graced my cheek. By 7:45, he was gone. Florence stirred in her basin at making the small snuffling sounds that meant she'd be awake and hungry. Soon I lifted her, carefully breathing in that sweet baby smell that never failed to calm my racing heart, and settled into the rocking chair my grandmother had carved and my mother had refinished, and Dorothy had tried to throw away. "Good morning, my love," I whispered against her soft hair. "Did you sleep well?" She looked up at me with those serious blue eyes, Julian's eyes, unfortunately, but set in a face that was pure mine, and I felt the familiar surge of fierce protectiveness that had become my driving force. Everything I was about to do was for her to give her a future free from Northy's manipulations, Julian's weaknesses, and the toxic sentinel legacy that would otherwise define her entire life. After feeding and changing Florence, I went downstairs to make breakfast and found Dorothy already in my kitchen, dressed in one of her expensive workout outfits and drinking coffee from my favorite mug. "Good morning, dear," she said, without looking up from her phone. "I've scheduled appointments with the nanny candidate for this afternoon and the business administrator position for Thursday. I thought we should move quickly on both fronts. Move quickly before I could change my mind or cause more trouble." "That sounds perfect," I said, pouring my own coffee and settling Florence in her bouncy seat. "I'm excited to get started." Dorothy glanced up, studying my face for signs of rebellion or resentment. Finding none, smiled that satisfied smile I'd learned to hate. "Excellent. Oh, and Julie mentioned you've been having some trouble sleeping. I know a wonderful doctor who specializes in postpartum issues. Very discreet, very understanding about the challenges, new mother's face, a psychiatrist, someone who could document my instability and provide expert testimony about my fitness as a mother. If custody became an issue, I'm actually sleeping much better now," I said, truthfully. "I think I was just adjusting to the new routine, but thank you for thinking of me." Of course, there were family, the word that excused every boundary violation, every manipulation, every casual cruelty she'd inflicted over the past year. We chat pleasant while I fed Florence her breakfast, Dorothy outlining her plans for my future with the same casual confidence she'd shown when redesigning my nursery. I noted and agreed and played the part of the grateful daughter-in-law who'd finally learned her place. She had no idea he was looking at a bomb that was about to explode. After Dorothy left for her morning tennis game, I spent some time with Florence playing peek-a-boo and singing lullabies while my mind reviewed the final checklist. One more time, everything was in place. Every contingency had been planned for, every possible reaction had been anticipated, encountered. At 11 a.m., I made the first call. "Mr. Harrison, this is Madeline Santina. I'm ready to proceed with the documents we discussed." My divorce attach was efficient and thorough. The papers would be ready for filing by the end of the day. The custody motion, supported by Dorsey's own journal entries documenting her attempts to manipulate the situation, would be submitted simultaneously. The second call went to the IRS agent who'd expressed interest in the Santino family's creative accounting practices. "Agent, under I have those additional documents you requested." The third call was to the reporter at the financial newspaper who specialized in exposing white-collar crime. "Miss Miller, yes, I'm ready to go on the record." By noon, I had set in motion a series of events that would destroy the sentence, family's reputation, fortune, and freedom. But that was just the opening act. The real show would begin tonight. I spent the afternoon playing the perfect mother and wife. I tidied the house, prepared Julian's favorite dinner and arranged everything to look exactly as I always did, normal, domestic, completely unthreatening. When Julian came home at 6:30, I greeted him with a smile and a kiss that was warmer than usual. "How was your day?" I asked, taking his briefcase and hanging up his coat like I'd done hundreds of times before. "Good," busy Mom said. "You're excited about the new arrangements." "Very excited. I think it's exactly what we need." He relaxed visibly, probably relieved that the months of tension were finally over. His difficult wife had been tamed, his mother was happy, and his life could return to the smooth, predictable patterns he preferred. We had a lovely dinner. Julian talked about work, I shared amusing stories about forensic, and we made plans for the weekend, like any normal couple for a few hours. I almost let myself remember why I'd fallen in love with him in the first place. But then Dorothy called as he did every evening, and I watched my husband's face light up with the kind of genuine warmth he hadn't shown me in months. "Hi, Mom. His dinner was great. Madeleine's been wonderful today." "Wonderful." Like a well-trained pet who'd finally learned not to bark tea visitors after Julian went to bed, I sat in the living room with my laptop, putting the final touches on a document that would serve as both explanation and evidence. The story of my marriage, Dory's manipulations, and the financial crimes site uncovered everything, documented with the same meticulous attention to detail that Dorothy had taught me to value. It would be published simultaneously on social media, sent to every major news outlet, and delivered to the relevant government agencies by tomorrow morning. The Santina family would be front-page news for all the wrong reasons, but that still wasn't enough. At 2 a.m., I made one final call. "Ruby is at line. I need that favor." We talked about Ruby. The nurse who'd held my hand during forensic birth had become an unexpected ally over the past few months. She'd seen firsthand how Dorothy had tried to control my labor and delivery, and she's been quietly documenting similar cases of family interference in medical care. "Everything's ready," he said quietly. "The safe house is prepared and the legal team knows to expect you. Are you sure you want to do this?" I looked around the house that had never really been mine at the life I tried so hard to make work, at the marriage that had died the night they locked me out in labor. "I'm sure. Then I'll see you tomorrow. Be safe at line." I hung up and walked through my house one last time, memorizing details I'd never see again. The granite countertop, Dorothy had chosen the marble fall. She'd insisted upon the family photos that told the story of Julian's life before me and would continue long after I was gone. In the nursery, I packed back for Florence with quiet efficiency: clothes, dippers, formula, toys, everything she'd need for the new life. We were about to begin as I slept peacefully through my preparations, trusting me to keep her safe, even though he had no idea how dramatically her world was about to change. I left 3 envelopes on Julian's pillow. The first contained divorce papers and a custody agreement that would give me primary custody while allowing him supervised. The terms were more generous than he deserved, but I wasn't trying to punish him for being weak. I was trying to save my daughter from becoming another worthy victim. The second envelope contained copies of all the evidence I'd gathered about the family's financial crimes, along with a detailed explanation of how Dorothy had manipulated our marriage from the very beginning, every cruel comment, every power play, every attempt to isolate and control me, all of it documented with dates, witnesses, and supporting evidence. The third envelope was simpler, just a short note that said, everything I'd never been able to tell him while we were married. Joan, I love you. I loved the man you were before. Your mother convinced you I was the enemy. I would have spent my life making you happy if you'd let me, but you chose her every time you chose her. Now I'm choosing our daughter. Don't try to find us. The legal system will handle custody arrangements, and my lawyers will handle everything else. By the time you read this, the world will know who the Sentence family really is. You can blame me for that if it helps you sleep at night. But we both know the truth. You did this to yourself. Take care of your mother. She's going to need you more than ever. Now, Madeline. At 4 a.m., I loaded my sleeping daughter into her car seat and drove away from the house where I tried so hard to belong. The October air was crisp and clean, and the eastern sky was just beginning to show the first hints of dawn. Somewhere behind me, Julian slept peacefully in our bed, unaware that his wife and child were gone. Somewhere cross town, Dorothy slept in her mansion, dreaming of the compliant daughter-in-law he thought she'd finally created. They would wake up to a nightmare, but for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Julian's first call came at 6:47 a.m. I was sitting in Ruby's kitchen feeding Florence her morning bottle, while the news played on the television in the background. The safe house was a small apartment across town, furnished with the basics and stocked with everything we'd need for the next few weeks. My phone buzzed against the counter, Juliana's name flashing on the screen. I let you go to voicemail. The second call came 30 seconds later, then the third by 7 a.m. He'd called 15 times. Finally, I answered. Madeline. His voice was raw, desperate. Where are you? Reference. What the hell is going on? I assume. Found my letters. Letters. Madeline. They're reporters outside our house. They're federal agents, asking questions about the business. Mom. Having some kind of breakdown. You need to come home right now and explain what you've done. The panic in his voice was almost satisfying. Almost. I'm not coming home. Julian. There is no home anymore. What are you talking about? Medline. You're scaring me. Whatever wrong we can fix it. Just come back and we'll work it out like we worked out the nursery, like we worked out my labor and delivery, like we worked out every other problem in our marriage where your mother's opinion mattered more than your wife's feelings. Like how you and your mom locked me out while I was in labor silence. Then this is about Mom. Medline. If you're upset about, I'm not upset, Julian. I'm done. I could hear Dor's voice in the background, shrill and demanding, probably asking who he was talking to, what I was saying, how they could regain control of the situation. At line. Please, I love you. Florence needs her father. Florence needs a father who puts her first. A father who protects her from toxic people instead of enabling them. A father who chooses his family over his mother. I do choose family. You are my family. No, Julian, I was never your family. I was just the woman you married while waiting for your mother to approve of your choices. The line went quiet, except for the sound of his breathing and Dorsey's increasingly frantic voice in the background. Madeline, he said, finally, his voice breaking. Please don't take my daughter away from me. I'm not taking her away, I'm keeping her safe. There's a difference. I hung G up and turned off the phone. Within an hour, the news had broken. White open financial empire built on fraud, the Santino family's dark secrets exposed. The headlines screamed across every major news outlet. Supported by the mountain of evidence I'd provided to reporters and investigators, bank records showing systematic tax investment documents revealing insider trading, email correspondence. CES that painted a picture of deliberate, calculated financial crime spanning 2 decades. But the most damaging revelations came from Northy's own journal, her cold, calculating assessments of family members as chess pieces to be manipulated. Her detailed plans for controlling Juliana's marriage and isolated his wife, her documented attempts to interfere with medical care during childbirth to establish grounds for custody challenges. The woman who presented herself as a devoted mother and doting grandmother was revealed as a meta manipulator who saw people as tools to be used for her own benefit. The public reaction was swift since brutal social media exploded with commentary about the case. #Sentner scandal began trending. Within hours, women shared their own stories of toxic mothers-in-law and controlling families. Legal experts weigh in on the evidence and its potential criminal implications, most devastating. Other victims began coming forward: Juliana's ex-girlfriends who had been driven away by Dorothy's interference, former business partners who'd been cheated or manipulated, employees who'd been fired for questioning unethical practices, a pattern of abuse and control that stretched back years. All centered around Dorothy's need to dominate everyone in her orbit. By noon, federal agents had raided both the family business and Dorsey estate. Julian had been taken in for questioning. And Dorothy herself had been arrested on charges of tax, EVI, on security fraud and conspiracy. Why? The empire she'd spent decades building crumbled in a single morning. My phone started ringing again around 2 p.m., not Julie, in this time. He was probably too busy talking to lawyers and federal investigators. This call came from Thomas, Juliana's older brother. "Madeline, what the hell have you done?" Thomas had always been the coldest of the Santina children. The one most like Dorothy. In his calculating approach to relationships, his wife had left him 2 years ago, taking their children and citing irreconcilable differences that everyone knew meant his chosen his mother over his marriage. I told the truth. I said simply, "You've destroyed this family." "Destroyed lives for what?" "Because Mom hurt your feelings. Your mother tried to take my child away from me." Thomas She documented her plans in her own handwriting. She interfering with my medical care to create evidence of my unfitness as a mother. She manipulated every aspect of my marriage to isolate me from my husband. That's ridiculous. Mom loves Julian. She loves you. Your mother loves control. He loves power. She loves being the center of everyone's universe, but She doesn't love people. She collects them. You're insane maybe, but I'm also free. Thomas hung up, but the calls kept coming. Nately sobbing about her honeymoon being ruined by scandal, family, friends demanding explanations, lawyers trying to gauge my willingness to cooperate with various investigations, ignored them all. That evening, Ruby brought me dinner. In the latest news updates, the Santa story had gone national. Picked up by networks hungry for a scandal that combined family drama, financial crime, and a sympathetic young mother fighting against a controlling dynasty. "How are you holding up?" Ruby asked, settling into the chair across from mine. While Florence played on a blanket between us better than I expected, he was true despite the Kida unleashed, despite the uncertain future ahead. I felt calmer than I had in months. For the first time in a year, I feel like myself again. Any regrets? I looked down at my daughter, who was coming a teething ring and babbling contentedly to herself. She had no idea that her world had been turned upside down, that her father was facing criminal charges, that her grandmother was in federal custody. All she knew was that her mother was there, holding her, keeping her safe. "No," I said firmly, "no regrets." The next morning brought July into my door. He looked terrible, unshaved in Hollywood, wearing the same clothes he'd had on the day before. The confident businessman had been replaced by a broken man who'd lost everything in the span of 24 hours. Ruby answered the door, "But let me decide whether to speak with him." I agreed. Partly out of curiosity and partly because I thought he deserved a chance to say goodbye to his daughter. We sat in Ruby's small living room, fluent, sleeping peacefully in her car seat between us, like a tiny reminder of what we created together and what I was now protecting. "They arrested her," Julian said without preamble. "They arrested my mother. I know the charges are serious. Madeline S.A. could go to prison for years. S.A. committed crimes for years. This is what accountability looks like." He ran his hands through his hair. The gesture so familiar made my heart ache for the man I'd fallen in love with. S.G. was just trying to protect the family. Everything he did for us. SHE was protecting her power, her control, her version of what the family should be. SA loves me. I don't doubt that, but love without respect is just possession, and your mother never learned the difference. Julian looked at our sleeping daughter, his eyes filling with tears. "Can I hold her?" I hesitated then. "Not it." He lifted Florence with the careful reference of a man who wasn't sure he could get another chance, cradling her against his chest while he slept on, oblivious to the drama surrounding her. "I love her so much," he whispered. "I love you both so much, I know you do, but love isn't enough. Julian, it never was. What can I do? How do I fix this?" I studied his face, looking for some sign of the man who once made me believe in fairy tales. "You can fix this. Too much has been broken, too much trust has been lost, so that's it or done. Our marriage is over because you couldn't get along with my mother." The old Julian was still there, I realized, still minimizing, still missing the point, still unable to see the situation clearly. Because admitting the truth would mean acknowledging his own role in the destruction. Our marriage is over, because when I needed you most, you chose her, when I was in labor begging for help. You locked me out of my own house and let your mother play doctor with our child's life. We were trying to help stop. I held up a hand, suddenly exhausted by the familiar pattern of his excuses. "Just stop. I don't need you to understand anymore. I don't need you to validate my experience or admit you were wrong. I just need you to let us go." Julian held Florence for another 10 minutes, whispering promises he couldn't keep in apologies. That came too late when he finally handed her back to me. His face was wet with tears. "I'll fight the custody arrangement. I'll fight for my daughter. You can try, but the courts will see the same evidence everyone else has seen. You'll read your mother's journal entries about using Florence as a weapon against me. They'll hear testimony about the night you prevented me from getting medical care while I was in labor." I stood up, signaling that our conversation was over. "You made your choice, Julian. Now live with it." He walked to the door, then passed and looked back at me one last time. "I really did love you at line." "I know," I said softly. "That's what makes this so sad." After he left, I sat with Florence in the quiet department and allowed myself to grieve for the life I thought we were building together, the dreams I'd had of growing old with Julian, of raising our children in a home filled with love and laughter, of being part of a family that chose each other every day. Those dreams were dead now, killed by Northy's manipulation and Julian's weakness and my own refusal to disappear quietly into the background of their story. But new dreams were already taking shape, dreams of raising my daughter in a home where her voice would be heard and her choices would be respected, dreams of teaching her that love without respect was worthless, that he deserved better than conditional acceptance, that he had the power to write her own story regardless of what other people expected. Dreams of freedom. 1 year later, I stood in the kitchen of our new house, a modest craftsman, Bangalore, 3 states away from the Centeno Empire, watching Forrest take her first tentative steps between the coffee table and the couch. "Come on, sweetheart," I encouraged, crouched down with my arms outstretched. "You can do it." She wobbled for a moment, her chubby legs, unsteady but determined, then took 3 proud steps before tumbling into my arms with a delighted giggle. "That's my brave girl," I whispered, covering her face with kisses as essays squared with laughter. The past months had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media attention, and the complicated process of building a new life from scratch. The Santa scandal had dominated headlines for weeks, with new revelations emerging almost daily about the family's financial crimes and Dorothy's psychological manipulation tactics. Dorothy herself had been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Julian received 5 years, though he was eligible for parole in 3 with good behavior. Thomas had cooperated with investigators in exchange for a lighter sentence, 2 years plus community service and restitution. The family business had been dissolved, its assets ceased to pay back to fraud, dead investors and unpaid taxes. The mansion had been sold to cover legal fees and fines. The dynasty Dorothy had spent decades building was utterly destroyed. But none of that mattered to me anymore. What mattered was the life Florence and I had built together in our little house with its sunny yellow kitchen and the rocking chair my grandmother had made. What mattered was the garden I was planting in the backyard and the local MMS group I joined, and the small freelance writing business I started to support us. What mattered was freedom. I'd received numerous interview requests from journalists, documentary filmmakers, and talk show hosts wanting to tell my story. The narrative of the brave young mother who taken down a corrupt dynasty made for compelling television. But I turned them all down. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about punishment or justice or proving a point. This was about healing everyday Forrest. And I learned something new about life without the Centeno shadow hanging over us. Simple things like choosing our own breakfast without worrying about Dorsey's opinions about proper nutrition. Important things like making decisions based on what felt right, rather than what would keep the peace. We had routines now that belongs to us alone, morning walks through the neighborhood where Florence babbled at passing dogs and collected interesting leaves. Afternoon nap in the rocking chair while I read books I chosen simply because they looked interesting. Evening bath time filled with splashing in laughter and no one rushing us to finish. The house has become a sanctuary in ways our old home never had. Every room reflected choices I'd made freely without input from committee or approval from higher authorities. The walls were painted in colors I loved. The furniture was comfortable rather than impressive. The refrigerator was covered with Forrest CES artwork in photos of our adventures, rather than formal family portraits and social obligation calendars. It was exactly what I dreamed of during those dark months when I'd felt like a prisoner in my own life. My lawyer called regularly with about the ongoing legal proceedings. There had been attempts by various Sentinel relatives to challenge the custody arrangement. But Dorsey's own documented plans to use Forrest as a weapon had made those efforts fail. Julian wrote letters from prison, long rambling apologies that showed he was finally beginning to understand how thoroughly his mother had manipulated our marriage. I read them, but didn't respond. Some wounds were too deep forwards to heal and some relationships were too damaged to repair, but I hoped that someday, when he was truly free from Dorsey's influence, he might become the kind of father Florence deserved to know. The doorbell rang just as I was settling Florence down for her afternoon nap. Through the people, I saw a familiar face that made my heart race with a mixture of joy and apprehension. My sister EA stood on the porch holding a suitcase and wearing the biggest smile I've seen in years. Madeline S.A. swept me into a fierce hug the moment I opened the door. "Oh my God, look at you. You look at easing. You look free." Emma had been the first person I'd called after leaving Julian, the first person to know I was safe and starting over, but this was her first visit to our new home, her first chance to see the life Florence and I had built from nothing. "Look at this place," he marveled, wandering through the small rooms with obvious delight. "So it's exactly what you always said you wanted, it's exactly what I never knew I could have. I corrected." We spent the afternoon catching up while Florence showed off her new walking skills and Emma over every developmental milestone I documented in the baby book. Dorothy had once criticized as sentimental nonsense. "So what's next?" Emma asked, as we sat on the backwater, watching Forrest explore the garden, while the late afternoon sun painted everything golden. "I don't know," I admitted for the first time in my adult life. "I get to figure that out as I go. No 5-year plan. No strategic objectives. No committee meetings to determine the best path forward." I laughed, remembering the Madeline who'd marry Julian, with a detailed timeline for house spying, baby making and career advancement. That woman had been so sure he could control her future by making the right choices in pleasing the right people. No plans beyond making sure Forrest grows up, knowing she's loved for exactly who he is. "That's a pretty good plan," Ma said softly, that evening. After Em had left for her hotel and Forrest was asleep in her crib, I sat in my grandmother's rocking chair and allowed myself to think about the future. For the first time in months, there would be challenges ahead. Single motherhood was hard. Even without the complications of a highly publicized divorce and a co-parent in prison, money would be tightly until my business grew. Florence would have questions about her father and grandmother that I'd have to answer honestly, but age-appropriately. But there would also be possibilities I'd never imagined when I was trapped in the Centeno web of expectations and obligations. Florence could grow up anywhere we wanted to live. She could pursue any interest that caught her attention. She could be anything he wanted to be without the weight of family legacy dictating her choices. Most importantly, She would grow up knowing that her voice mattered, that her opinions were valued. That love without respect was no love at all. and he deserved better than conditional acceptance from anyone in her life. As I rocked in the chair that had held 3 generations of strong women, I made the same promised whisper to my unborn daughter during those dark nights when I'd first realized I was trapped. I would always choose her. I would always protect her. I would always make sure he knew he was enough exactly as he was. The house settled around us with small creaks and sighs, the sounds of a home that was truly ours outside. The night's hood was quiet, except for the distant sound of children playing in dog, sparking the ordinary symphony of ordinary people living ordinary, beautiful lives. For the first time since I said I do to Julian Santina, I felt genuinely at peace. Dorothy had been wrong about so many things, but you've been right about one: some bonds couldn't be broken no matter what. The bond between a mother and daughter who chose each other every single day was unlockable. And that was the only family legacy that mattered. The letter arrived on a Wednesday morning in March, delivered by certified mail to the address ID carefully kept private. For 5 years, France was a kindergarten. I was working on a freelance article about urban gardening, and the spring sun was streaming through the kitchen windows of our little house. The return address made my hands shake: Federal Correctional Institution, Danbury Northeast Prison. I almost threw IT away without reading it almost, but curiosity won as IT always did. I opened the envelope with the same careful precision Dorothy had once used for everything in her perfectly controlled life. Dear Madeline, I expect you're surprised to hear from me. I expect you prefer never to hear from me again. I understand that and I respect it, but I have things I need to say before I die. As I'm dying, pancreatic cancer diagnosed 3 months ago. The doctors give me 6 months at most. I'm sure that news brings you no sadness, and I don't expect IT to. I've had 5 years to think about what happened between us, about the choices I made and the harm I caused. 5 years to understand what I became and why I became. IT prison has a way of stripping away everything. That doesn't matter until all you're left with is the truth. The truth is that I was terrified of losing Julian, not just to you, but to anyone who might come between us, after Richard died. Julian, being the first son, was all I had left of the life I built, the identity I'd created for myself. I couldn't bear the thought of sharing him, of becoming less important in his eyes than someone else. I told myself I was protecting him. I told myself I was preserving the family. I told myself that what you saw as control was actually love. But I was lying, Madeline, to you, to Julian, and most of all to myself. What I did wasn't love. IT was possession. IT was fear dressed up in maternal concern and family loyalty. IT was the actions of a woman who confused being needed with being loved, who thought controlling people was the same as caring for them. I destroyed my son's marriage because I couldn't stand the idea that he might love someone more than he loved me. I interviewed with the birth of my granddaughter because I couldn't accept that you were her mother, not me. I documented plans to take your child away from you because I believed in my twisted reasoning that SHE would be better off without the mother who actually loved her. I was wrong about everything. Julian visits me once a month. His changed at line, prison, changed him. But more than that, losing you inference changed him. He talks about you both constantly, not with anger or resentment, but with the kind of grief that comes from knowing you've lost something precious through your own stupidity. He's getting out next year. He's already making plans to rebuild his life, and those plans don't include trying to win you back or fighting for custody of Florence. He knows he lost the right to both when he chose me over his family, but he asks about her constantly. He keeps every photo you've sent, the lawyer, every school report, every update about her life. He's created a scrapbook of the daughter he's never really known, and he reads IT like other people read religious texts. I'm not writing to ask you to forgive him. I'm not writing to ask you to forgive me. I'm writing to tell you that you were right about everything and to ask you to please someday, when Floran is old enough to understand, tell her that her grandmother was a fool who loved her enough to die, knowing SHE was better off without me. You won Medline completely and utterly. You saved your daughter from becoming another Dorothy, another woman who confuses control with love and possession with caring. You gave for something I never gave my children, the knowledge that he is loved for who he is, not who SHE can be mulled into being. That's the greatest gift any mother can give her child. I'm proud of you for that. I know my pride means nothing to you, But I needed to say, "It, anyway, take care of our girl, keep her safe, keep her free, Dorothy, P.S. There's a trust fund that was set up for Florence before the scandal broke. It survived the asset seizure because It was in her name alone. The account information is enclosed. It should be enough to pay for her college education and give her a good start in life is the only thing I can do for her now and the only thing left of the Centeno fortune that wasn't built on lies." I read the letter 4 times, my emotions cycling through anger, sadness, and finally a kind of exhausted relief. Dorothy was dying, and Essie knew she'd been wrong. Julian was getting out of prison and didn't plan to disrupt our lives. The nightmare that had begun 7 years ago was finally truly over. The trust fund information was legitimate. I called the bank to verify $2 million set aside for Forrest C.'s future by a grandmother who realized too late that love meant letting go. That afternoon, I picked Florence up from school and watched her race across the playground. Told me her dark hair flying in her face, bright with joy, Essie launched herself into my arms with the complete confidence of a child who had never doubted She was wanted, loved, and cherished. "Mama, guess what we learned about today? What sweetheart family trees," Mrs. Peterson says. "Every family is different, and that's what makes them special. Sarah has 2 moms and Tommy lives with his grandpa, and I have the best mama in the whole world." Essie hugged me fiercely. And I breathed in the scent of playground dirt and strawberry shampoo of childhood and innocence and all the possibilities that lay ahead for this brave little girl who would grow up free. "You're pretty special yourself." Florence rose. "I know," he said, with the supreme confidence of a 6-year-old who'd never been told she wasn't enough. "Mrs. Peterson says, we're going to draw our family trees tomorrow. Can you help me night?" Of course. That evening, we sat at our kitchen table with colored pencils and construction paper, creating Forrest's version of our family tree. It was simple and beautiful, just the 2 of us plus an Emma and her husband and their new baby, plus Ruby. I'd become like a grandmother to Florence, plus our neighbors, the Johnson who helped with babysitting and share their garden vegetables with us. "What about Daddy?" Florence asked, pausing with her green pencil halfway to the paper. She knew he had a father. I'd shown her pictures and told her age-appropriate stories about Julian, always emphasizing that he loved her very much, but couldn't be with us right now. She had accepted this explanation with the matter-of-fact practicality of children who adapt to whatever reality they're given. "You can put him on there if you want to." Essie considered this seriously, then drew a small stick figure at the edge of the paper. "He's far away, but maybe someday he can visit." "Maybe someday," I agreed. Essie didn't ask about grandparents because in her world, Ruby filled that role perfectly. Dorothy and Richard Santina were just named from stories no more real to her than characters in a book, which was exactly how I wanted it. After Florence went to bed, I sat in my grandmother's rocking chair and read Daddy's letter one more time. Then I walked outside to our small backyard, where the garden I'd planted 5 years ago now bloomed with vegetables and flowers I'd chosen simply because they were beautiful. I need a match and watched North's letter burn, the words turning to ash and floating away on the spring breeze. Some endings I realized were actually beginnings, and some victories were worth every battle it took to win them. Inside, Lauren slept peacefully in her bed, surrounded by books and toys and drawings of our little family. Tomorrow she's wake up knowing he was loved, knowing she was safe, knowing she had the power to choose her own path through life. Dorothy had been right about one thing that was the greatest gift any mother could give her child, and it was a gift that would keep giving generation after generation, long after the Santino name was forgotten, and the price of freedom was just a story we sometimes told about the brave woman who refused to disappear quietly into someone else's expectations. The woman who chosen love over loyalty, truth over peace and her daughter's future over her own past, the woman who learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away, and sometimes walking away how you win everything that matters. Well, that's all for today's story. If you like this video, please subscribe. We will continue to update more exciting stories and look forward to seeing you next time.